just doing the preparation for painting, and I use scouring pad because it conforms to any shape. I'm still finding the top of this a little bit dull. And I've got these. This Backstory Blaster, standard battle police security rifle, and it can have a built-in stun gun on the top. Jam the gun into somebody's chest and they get a shock. Worked out the rough measurements and just drilled a series of holes. Finding something to stop this moving around the magazine release, and I use that, which is one of these. Allows the magazine release to move without. Usual thing, first colour is the Mana Red undercoat. So there we have all the bits undercoated. Oh, I forgot to say, guys, wear a mask, you really need it. Open window, lots of fresh air while you're doing this. Fixing the muzzle on, very simple. Why not use the lugs that Nerf moulded in anyway? Twist clicks in. Magazine well, wear and tear around here. So, little bits of paint, and then I bought myself some a salt grinder from my local Woolworth, and I'm going to grind some in my hand so I can use my fingers and sprinkle it on. So I'm just going to get it where I want it, and of course these two peaks sticking up, because they're sticking up, they're going to be a main contact point for things, so they're going to be the main point that gets worn and eventually gets rusty. The most heavily weathered part of the weapon is probably going to be the magazine, so that's going to need a lot of salt for the little bits of rust to be there. But if you know my work, you know, after this stage I go with the clay resist. I spray the silver, then do the clay resist, and then when the clay comes off you see a lot of silver, a lot of wear underneath, so there's going to be a lot of silver on this. Before I start on that, I've just done this test piece, and what I've done, I've sprayed a band of each of the colours I'm thinking of using, and there's actually 3 different greys there, but unfortunately they look all the same. So I'm going to have to rethink the colour scheme. But for now, it's time for the silver. I'll show you one. Okay, let's do one of the hand pieces. I want the silver around where the salt is. So you try to be very sparing, because despite what I said about trying not to spray over the salt, you have to at this stage. But you don't want to, you know, 2 or 3 coatings of different colour paint over it, because that'll really bond it to the surface. I'm just trying to put the silver anywhere there's a raised surface it could catch or get worn against clothing, body armour. Try and get some silver on all the hard edges, because there will be just general wear and tear happening. Now of course the magazine can be really badly worn. Next stage done. So the next bit is actually putting on the markings. I'll put on the clay mask. Right guys, next day back to get off the salt, just using a little sponge scouring pad. It's going to scratch the silver paint, but that really doesn't matter since most of it's going to be painted, and anything that's uncovered is going to be scratched anyway. I guess I should explain for those new to my channel, this is what I use for my resist. This is what's known as clay slip. It's just liquid clay. This is solidified a bit because I just let it dry out and just wet it up the day before I need to use it. And you use it just like you would use a latex mask. You just paint it on. Now, when I paint this with whatever colour I'm going to paint it, that will be the resist. So what is underneath that will show. So, you know, if I just put it on roughly, can put little scratches in. All you want to do is not make something that looks like a brush mark. And you'll put it along all the raised edges usually, because that's where it's going to get worn, especially around the pistol grip. It's going to get held here. These corners are going to get bumped and worn. And you can even just run the ferrule of the brush along. It'll just leave some clay behind. It's all done. There, I hope you can see the difference. Very heavily covered with clay at the front, because as I said, that's a stun weapon and use it a lot, so it's burnt off a lot of the paint. I'm also conscious of what I'm going to have. I'm going to measure this space here, and that's where I'm going to have one of my bits of text, and there's going to be a yellow band behind it. So what I want is some of the yellow band melted and worn off too. So there's my little tape logo, ONS Security, and honestly it's too small. And what I'm thinking of doing now, instead of the whole thing, I'm just going to do ONS much bigger and fit it around here. ONS, you know, maybe about so big, and then it'll have the yellow band going around it. How to make cheap homemade stencils. Just laid down 3 pieces of tape there, overlapping slightly. And there's my little printed out piece. I'm just going to tape that over the top. I'm just going to use my sharp knife, my little metal ruler, just to cut straight through that, not worrying about if I damage the paper, because what I'm aiming for is the tape underneath. Now, to get them off the glass and onto the gun, all it is when I've laid the tape down, I've laid it lowest level, second level, top level. So if I peel from the top down, it'll bring the other ones up. So using a craft knife, carefully pick up a corner of the first one, but as you can see, it's lifting and it's bringing the next layer up with it. Now what you want to be careful here, because if I try and lift that, the stick of this is just going to cause a rip, so I have to get under there and help it up. Okay, so there's my first letter. Put it down, just lightly press just the bottom edge, then roll the whole thing up. And that line there is parallel to that line, so I'm pretty happy that it's straight, and that just fits. So that's it, that line's still parallel, so I'm gently just going to push that down, not too heavy at the moment. When I've got the other letters in, I'll push them right down hard, and now I do the same again. I lift up the end. Let's have a look. Yeah, that looks reasonably straight, that'll do. I'm not going to kill myself over this. And now the S. Now I'm going to press it down. I'm going to put the letters on the other side, and then I'll come back and do the band. Right guys, now, sorry I didn't show you the rest of this masking and stuff, because halfway through this I discovered that the yellow paint on the other side wasn't dry, so that tape's probably stuck there forever. So I'm going to attempt to paint this, peel it off and do the repairs after the paint's dried. So I'm using my dark grey over it. It's a few hours after doing the painting, and it's coming off pretty well, but you can see I've had to resort to drastic measures. This grey I bought is a top coat colour, and it's pretty tough stuff. So I've never had to do this before, but I've had to put the whole gun in water to soak through it, and you've got to get a scratch somewhere where there's some clay, and then let the water soak in, and then you can get in and start doing your wear. Okay, pistol grip in there, give it a wet. Scratch it. Comes off really nice there. That was good. So I've got a great big wear spot there now. Right, got my connectors done. And the corresponding bits out of the pistol grip. Let's put this thing together. Despite having lost the original magazine release, I'm still going to put it together. I'll just show you what's going on the side here. Just whacked the switch in there with my last bit of epoxy putty. Activates the button, and just running the wires up out of the top. So that on, and off we go with the screws. Always as a rule of thumb, test things as you go along. Spring still works. Click that in. Cool bananas. Time for another test fire. Realign the barrel again. Cool. Here we go. That'll probably work. Yep, okay. Check. It looks like my brilliant idea of being able to pop my battery in there is not going to work because there's no clearance. So, and just chuck the mega dart in there. There we go. Blaster still works. Woohoo! Right, so last pieces, the muzzle. Like that, I believe. Yep, there we go. And the back. I've put the support in. Right, last stencil, guys. So I've printed out the Free Oz logo. Just going to tape it down. Tape it over this heavy piece of paper I've got here. What I'm going to do, tape down the piece of paper underneath so it doesn't move, and tape this down on top. Now another little trick, what I do is wherever all the corners are, I mark that point, because then you can put your rule across the top. You can't see where the top of the letters are, but you can see where they start and end. So cutting through this, I'm pressing hard enough to cut into this, because that's what I'm going to use for my stencil. That's a bit heavier. Done. Right, just tape it down a stencil, and yes, it is at an angle. If I put it straight, the top of these letters is lost in these grooves here. So if you can see the top of the letter and the bottom letter, you can make out what the letter is. So spray some more red paint. Now the temptation is to actually put a white under this to make the red pop a bit more, but wouldn't be that realistic. So I'm just going to put it on as a soldier would put it on. Do this 2 or 3 times to get a nice even coat. Okay guys, just another stencil. That's just the template I cut it out from. I'm not actually going to be using that. So I've taped that on and just used that as a template again for where I'm going to put my blue paint. When it's dry, I've got the actual stencil in white I can go over with. Covering a big area, so I'm going to use a big brush. Just by stippling it like this, it's a bit easier, less messy, and it looks a bit more rough. And that's a pretty good Aussie blue, that one. Now my nice blue paint's dried. When you're doing this, you don't want too much paint on the brush. You can see how heavy it's going on the second time. This is the black wash, just to dirty it up. That's 50/50 Tamiya XF1 flat black mixed with their X20A thinner. Let's begin, shall we? Just slap it on. Doesn't matter what it goes over, because it's all going to be wiped off. Right, that bit's done. Information sharing time. I was starting to run out of my flat black, had a search around and found this model colour, Vallejo, called black grey, but it's pretty much black, and it worked a treat. Takes to the X20A nicely. You can see how that looks very rough. I decided not to clean up this edge because the stencil bent over this plastic, and that's what would have happened in real life. Okay, major carbon scoring around the barrel. What I'm doing is spraying around anywhere that looks like a vent or a heat release. Right guys, final assembly test fire. Now for the fun. Put it in the right way. Got a bit bored there after a while. I got 45 darts to pick up.